Why food sucked in medieval times, boring history for sleep, asterisk. Let's begin by stepping into the muddy lanes of a medieval European village. Somewhere between the 12th and 14th centuries, the first rays of sunlight pierce the fog that hovers over thatched rooftops and newly plowed fields. Cocks crow, sheep and goats bleat, and from the communal oven rises the faintest, warmest scent of baking bread. For most people in medieval Europe, this is as close to culinary delight as the day will ever get. It is easy, from our modern vantage point surrounded by abundant markets, dazzling spice racks, and the constant lure of sugar and salt to romanticize the food of the Middle Ages. But if you were to live, even for a single day, as a medieval peasant or artisan, you'd find that food is neither rich nor plentiful. For most, the daily menu is a dull, gritty affair, a struggle to satisfy hunger, not to savor taste. Picture yourself as a tenant farmer named Agnes, rising before dawn. Your breakfast, like every other meal, revolves around bread. This is not the pillowy yeast-leavened kind that lines modern bakeries, but a dense, coarse loaf, heavy with bran and bits of grit from the millstone. Wheat is expensive and reserved for the rich. Your bread is made from barley, rye, or oats, often mixed with whatever cheap grains are available. The crust is thick, the crumb gray and chewy. You cut a slab gnawing on it as you trudge out to the fields. Bread is the anchor of the medieval diet, the staff of life. It is called dand not without reason. For many, bread provides more than half of daily calories. Even the poorest must find a way to grind, bake, and store enough to last between harvests, but it is rarely fresh. In winter, stale loaves hard as wood are dunked in weak ale or watery pottage to soften them. Sometimes, the bread is so rough that it wears your teeth down over the years. Alongside the bread is ale or small beer, weak and slightly sour, brewed at home or in the village tavern. Water is avoided where possible, feared for its impurity. This ale has little alcohol. It is drunk by all ages, from children to elders. It provides some hydration, a trace of nutrition, and, if you are lucky, a little flavor. For breakfast, there may be a porridge of oats or barley, simmered over a smoky fire, perhaps with a few beans or wild greens if the season is right. In summer, you might find a handful of blackberries or hazelnuts added in, gathered from the hedgerows. In winter, the porridge is plain, sometimes only thickened with leftover breadcrumbs. Lunch is often eaten in the fields, a cold slice of bread, perhaps an onion or a chunk of hard cheese if you are fortunate. Meat is a rarity, reserved for holidays, feasts, or times of crisis when a sickly animal is slaughtered. Most peasants see pork or beef a handful of times a year. Chickens and eggs are too valuable to eat regularly, often saved for market or rent payments. Vegetables, such as leeks, cabbages, beans, and turnips, are the backbone of the medieval garden. These are not the crisp, tender produce we know today, but hardy, fibrous varieties bred for survival. Cabbages boiled until limp, turnips mashed, beans stewed endlessly. A pot of pottage simmers day after day on the hearth, a watery soup, thickened with whatever scraps are available. Into it go parsnips, peas, a few herbs if the garden is kind, and, on very special days, a bone for flavor. Fruits are rare luxuries, eaten in season and then quickly forgotten. Apples, pears, plums, and cherries grow in monastery orchards and the gardens of the well-off. Most peasants content themselves with wild berries and crab apples. Preserving fruit is difficult. Dried apples or plums are tough and tasteless, and the process is laborious. Sugar is almost unknown, honey precious and reserved for the church, or the nobility. In the manor house or castle, the diet is more varied, but not by as much as you'd think. The lord and his family eat white bread, roasted meats, and spiced sauces on feast days, but even their meals are dominated by bread, ale, and salted meats. Butter and cheese are more common, and the cooks wield spices like pepper, cinnamon, and ginger imported at enormous cost from the east. These add some excitement to otherwise bland and repetitive meals. But even the nobility cannot escape the limits of the land. For the vast majority, mealtime is not a celebration, but a moment of pause in a day of labor. Food is swallowed quickly, often with the company of family or fellow workers, sometimes in silence. Eating is functional, not social, a matter of refueling for the hours of toil ahead. Yet food is never far from the mind. The memory of famine is alive in every household. Bad harvests caused by rain, drought, frost, or disease are frequent. When the grain stores run low, desperation grows. People forage for nettles, wild garlic, or acorns to stretch the pottage. Bread is baked with chestnut flour or even with bark and straw in the worst years. Hunger is a constant threat, an undercurrent that shapes every decision. There is, in all this monotony, a kind of quiet resilience. Families find ways to make the most of what they have, drying beans, storing roots in cellars, bartering eggs for a little bacon, or sharing a rare treat on feast days. The rhythm of food is inseparable from the rhythm of life. Sowing, harvesting, slaughtering, preserving, and hoping the stores last until spring. How did people find comfort or even pleasure in such meager fare? What culinary ingenuity emerged From a world with so few resources, and what did feast days and special occasions look like for those who spent most of their lives surviving on bread and broth? The medieval kitchen, whether in the smoky croft of a peasant or the bustling back rooms of a manor, is a world apart from the modern, sanitized spaces we know today. You find it by scent and sound: the tang of wood smoke, the hiss of fat on the hearth, the mutter of voices, and the scrape of knives against rough boards. For most, a kitchen is simply the corner of a single-room dwelling where a hole in the roof lets out the worst of the smoke. In grander homes, there might be a separate building with larger hearths, bread ovens, and a crude array of pots and pans hanging from soot-blackened beams. No matter where you stand, your eyes water and your skin prickles with heat. Fire is the kitchen's only master. Everything bread, pottage, boiled roots, even the rare bit of meat is cooked over open flames. There are no controlled temperatures. Cooks judge readiness by touch, sight, and smell. Meals take hours to prepare and can be ruined in an instant by a gust of wind or a stray ember. Preservation is as much a daily ritual as eating. Without refrigeration, you rely on time-worn strategies. Grains are stored in barrels and bins, safe from mice if you're lucky. Roots and tubers are buried in cellars or packed in straw to keep them through winter. Beans and lentils are dried on racks in the sun. Salt, a valuable commodity, is essential for preserving meat or fish. When an animal is slaughtered, much of it is salted or smoked for the weeks ahead. The salt stings your fingers as you rub it into slabs of pork or lay out fillets of herring to dry in the cold air. Dairy, when available, is quickly turned into cheese or butter. Fresh milk spoils within hours, especially in summer. Eggs are precious and traded or eaten with caution, since a spoiled egg can turn a meal foul in seconds. Apples and plums, when harvested in abundance, are strung on wires or laid on rush mats to dry in the attic's heat. Even so, by midwinter, many fruits are little more than wrinkled shadows of their former selves. For the better off, spices offer a way to mask or enliven bland or stale food. Pepper, nutmeg, cloves, and cinnamon brought overland and by sea from India, the Spice Islands, or North Africa, are worth their weight in gold. They are not just culinary enhancements, but status symbols. To serve your guests a dish scented with exotic spices is to display wealth and power. For the poor, herbs, parsley, sage, and a few wild greens provide the only available flavor, and even these must be foraged or cultivated with care. What passes for delicacy in the Middle Ages is, to a modern palate, often baffling or even off. Jellied eels, blood pudding, fish pies thickened with eggs and breadcrumbs, and stews made from offal or marrow bones all are considered valuable sources of sustenance. Nothing is wasted. When a pig is butchered, every part is used. Feet are boiled for jelly, ears roasted, intestines cleaned for sausage casings, and the head cooked for festive stews. On feast days, saints' days, weddings, the harvest festival, the table transforms, at least for those with means. Roasted meats and birds appear: goose, pheasant, venison, or even swan. Elaborate pies with thick, inedible crusts serve as edible packaging, keeping the filling moist for days. The wealthy display their bounty with extravagant subtleties: pastries shaped into animals or castles, colored with saffron and beetroot, sometimes even made to move or sing through hidden mechanisms. But for the average family, a feast means a thicker pottage, an extra loaf of bread, and perhaps a taste of bacon or a wedge of cheese. The ale flows a bit more freely, and laughter echoes through the kitchen. Children savor the sweetness of a honey cake or a boiled apple, treats reserved for special occasions. When Lent or other fasts arrive, the diet grows even more meat. No meat, little fat, only fish, vegetables, and bread. Food, in all its forms, is a social glue. Harvest is a communal effort, and so is the threshing, milling, and baking that follow. In villages, the communal oven is a gathering place. News and gossip pass as loaves rise and cool. Even hunger is shared, in times of famine or blight, as families help one another stretch what little they have. At the manor, mealtime is hierarchical. Lords and ladies eat at the high table, servants at the lower benches, but everyone eats together. Hospitality is a sacred duty, and no guest may go hungry. Yet, the threat of hunger is always near. Poor harvests mean lean winters. A few weeks of rain or a late frost can ruin a year's supply of grain. The Great Famine of the early 14th century saw entire villages brought to their knees by failed crops, sick livestock, and dwindling stores. People turned to roots, bark, and even shoe leather to survive. Chroniclers describe mothers unable to feed their children, neighbors fighting over scraps, and bands of desperate people roaming the countryside in search of food. Still, life goes on. The village gardens, though meager, provide some color and flavor. The turn of the seasons brings hope. The first green shoots of spring, the flush of berries in summer, the golden promise of harvest. Each year is a gamble, a cycle of risk, hope, and adaptation. If you were to sit at a medieval table, what would you notice first? The sameness of the meals, the ingenuity in using every scrap, the way food is woven into ritual, work, and community. And yet, despite all the hardships, what small joys did people find in sharing a humble meal? The the year's great feasts draw near, and even the poorest household feels a subtle anticipation. Food, for all its monotony, is at the center of every medieval celebration and rite of passage. If daily meals are repetitive and meager, festival days offer a brief, shining break from the ordinary, a glimpse of abundance, community, and gratitude for whatever fortune the year has brought. Harvest festival is perhaps the most eagerly awaited event. The fields are cleared, the granaries filled as best as possible, and the last of the season's fruits and vegetables are gathered. The whole village participates, from the youngest children collecting nuts and apples to the oldest men and women who remember famines past. After days of back-breaking work, the community gathers on the green or in the largest hall, setting out trestle tables and benches, baskets of fresh bread, pots of pottage, and whatever the year has allowed. A pig may be slaughtered, there is laughter, singing, and for one precious afternoon, enough to eat. For wealthier households, a feast is both a display of status and a reaffirmation of order. The Lord's table groans with roasted meats and birds, sometimes elaborately spiced or glazed with honey. Large pies conceal stews of veal or rabbit. Sugared almonds, imported from the Mediterranean, fill silver bowls. There might even be imported wine, sweet and strong, a treasure to be poured sparingly for honored guests. Yet even here, not all is luxury. The bread is whiter, the cheese richer, but the foundations of the meal are the same as the peasants: grain, roots, salt, and ingenuity. After the feasting comes the fasting, a rhythm dictated by the church calendar. There are weeks, sometimes months, when the eating of meat, eggs, or even dairy is forbidden. On these days, fish and vegetables take center stage, and cooks stretch their creativity to mimic richer fare. Almond cheese, pea, pottage, or salted fish with vinegar and herbs. The discipline of fasting is as much about the spirit as the body. Hunger, the ever-present companion of the poor, is reimagined as a virtue, a path to humility and holiness. Children learn early to find pleasure in small things: a bit of honey on bread, a fresh apple, a boiled egg. Even a handful of wild herbs can brighten the pottage, and the memory of feast days is carefully tended all winter long. On Christmas, candles flicker in frosted windows, and families share what little they have: a loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, perhaps a scrap of roast if the year has been kind. Stories are told, songs are sung, and for a few hours, the cold and hunger recede. In monasteries, the rhythm is much the same, though cloaked in ritual and prayer. The bell rings for meals. The brethren file in, heads bowed, to share bread, beans, and, on special days, a cup of ale. Silence is observed, broken only by the chanting of psalms or the reading of scripture. Even the abbot eats what the novices eat, a reminder that, in the eyes of God, all are equal, and that the true feast is one of the spirit. Still, the shadow of famine is never far. Chroniclers record terrible years, rains that never ceased, fields that yielded nothing, winters that lasted too long. They describe the great famine, when even the rats and dogs disappeared, when bark and roots were ground into bread, and when hunger stole the light from children's eyes. In such times, sharing food became a radical act of solidarity, and the memory of generosity of a neighbor's loaf, a stranger's turnip, was carried forward for generations. Yet despite the hardship, food was a source of meaning and identity. Every region, every village, had its own ways, distinctive breads, cheeses, or stews, shaped by the climate, the soil, and centuries of necessity. Recipes were not written down, but passed from mother to daughter, shaped by memory and circumstance. Food marked every rite of passage: a special cake at a wedding, spiced ale for the birth of a child, a last shared meal before a loved one was buried. For the medieval person, to eat was to participate in the great cycle of life: sowing, reaping, preserving, hoping. Each mouthful was a reminder of the earth's limits and the community's resilience. Even the humblest meal was taken with gratitude, if not always with pleasure. There was pride in making do, in finding flavor where others saw only want, in surviving another winter when the spring came, bringing the first wild greens and the promise of a new crop. The relief was palpable. New pottage bubbled on every hearth, flavored with nettles, young onions, and fresh eggs from hens that had survived the winter. The monotony of bread and beans was broken, if only briefly, by the taste of something new, a hint of hope, a promise that the cycle would continue. What, then, is the lesson of the medieval table? Perhaps it is that survival itself is a kind of victory, that community, resourcefulness, and shared hardship are as important as any delicacy, that the stories we tell over a bowl of plain soup may endure far longer than any feast. As you drift into sleep, let your mind wander through the smoke-filled kitchens, the echoing great halls, and the frost-bitten fields of the medieval world. Imagine the simple comfort of a hard crust dipped in warm broth, the laughter of children chasing chickens, the quiet gratitude for another day, another meal, another season survived. In the end, the most boring details of history are those that connect us most deeply: the everyday acts of eating, sharing, and enduring.